Welcome to Champion Stories. If this is your first time here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And now, on to today's story. The recording studio in Manila buzzed with quiet anticipation as Marilu adjusted her headphones for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly, betraying the calm expression she wore for the cameras. Across from her, podcast host Joaquin leaned forward, his eyes reflecting both curiosity and respect for the woman who had agreed to break years of silence. Outside the soundproof walls, the bustling streets of Quezon City carried on their usual rhythm, unaware that within this modest studio, one of boxing's most guarded secrets was about to be revealed. Marilu had spent 15 years keeping this truth locked away, watching from afar as the world celebrated the man she once knew intimately, the man who had captured her heart long before he captured championship belts. The red recording light flickered on, and Marilu felt her chest tighten. She had rehearsed this moment countless times in her mind, yet sitting here now, with thousands of future listeners waiting to hear her words, the weight of what she was about to share felt overwhelming. Her decision to come forward hadn't been impulsive. It had taken months of careful consideration, sleepless nights, and conversations with her closest friend, Isadora, who had encouraged her to finally tell the truth. Joaquin's gentle introduction faded into background noise as Marilu's thoughts drifted back to those early days in General Santos City. She remembered the young man who would later become the pride of the Philippines, but back then, he was simply Manny, a determined fighter with calloused hands and dreams that seemed impossibly large for someone from their humble neighborhood. What the world didn't know, what she had never told anyone, was the depth of kindness that lived within him, even during those struggling years. While others saw only his fierce determination in the ring, she had witnessed the gentle soul that existed behind closed doors. She remembered how he would secretly visit elderly neighbor Teodora, bringing her groceries when her pension ran short, always making sure no one else knew about his quiet acts of generosity. The memory that haunted her most, the one that had convinced her to finally speak publicly, occurred during their third month together. They had been walking through the crowded market when they encountered a street child, no more than 8 years old, begging for coins near the fish vendors. While Marilu watched, expecting Manny to simply drop a few pesos into the boy's outstretched hand like everyone else, something extraordinary happened instead. Manny had knelt down to the child's level, his voice so soft that only Marilu could hear him speaking. He didn't just give money. He asked the boy's name, Florencio, and about his family situation. When he learned that Florencio was supporting his sick grandmother, Manny made a decision that revealed the true nature of his character. For the next 6 months, until Marilu and Manny eventually grew apart due to his increasingly demanding training schedule now, she watched him secretly provide for Florencio's family. But it wasn't just the financial support that moved her. It was how Manny maintained the boy's dignity throughout the process. He never made Florencio feel like charity case, instead creating small jobs for him, carrying water bottles to the gym, organizing equipment, so the child could feel he was earning his keep. Manny had understood something that many wealthy people never grasp, that true generosity preserves the recipient's pride. Now sitting in this podcast studio, Marilu realized that her revelation wouldn't just be about Manny's hidden generosity. It would be about something even more profound, his intuitive understanding of human dignity, his ability to love people not despite their circumstances, but because of their inherent worth. This wasn't the story of a successful boxer's charitable donations. This was the story of a man whose heart had always been larger than his fists. The podcast host cleared his throat gently, bringing her back to the present moment. Marilu took a deep breath, knowing that once she spoke, there would be no taking back these words. But some truths, she realized, were too important to keep hidden forever. Marilu's fingers found the small silver cross hanging around her neck, a nervous habit she had developed years ago during her relationship with Manny. The weight of the pendant reminded her of Sunday mornings in General Santos City, when she would accompany him to the small concrete church where his mother, Dionysia, insisted the family gather each week. Those quiet moments before Mass began had revealed another layer of the man the world thought they knew completely. She remembered how Manny would always arrive early, not for the religious ceremony itself, but to help elderly parishioner Herminia navigate the uneven steps leading to the church entrance. The old woman's arthritis made climbing those concrete stairs a painful ordeal, yet every Sunday morning, Without fail, Manny would position himself near the entrance, pretending to chat casually with other early arrivals while keeping one eye on the street corner where Herminia would appear. The beauty of these moments lay in their invisibility to others. Herminia never knew that Manny had specifically timed his arrival around her struggles, never realized that his gentle assistance came from careful observation rather than mere coincidence. He would approach her with such natural ease, offering his arm as if he himself needed the support, making conversation about neighborhood news while slowly guiding her up each step. Marilou's throat tightened as she recalled another memory that had shaped her understanding of Manny's character. During the rainy season of 2001, their neighborhood had experienced severe flooding that left many families temporarily homeless. While local government officials organized relief efforts and wealthy business owners made public donations, Manny had quietly emptied his modest savings account to purchase emergency supplies. But what struck Marilou most profoundly was how he distributed these supplies. Rather than making a grand gesture that would earn him recognition, he had enlisted the help of his younger brother and cousin, Wilfredo, to deliver packages during the early morning hours, before most people were awake. Each package contained rice, canned goods, clean water, and basic medicines, wrapped in plastic to protect against the persistent rain. The recipients never knew who their anonymous benefactor was. Manny had instructed his helpers to simply explain that the supplies came from concerned neighbors who wanted to help. When Marilou questioned why he refused to take credit for his generosity, his response had revealed the depth of his character. He explained that families dealing with disaster deserve to receive help without feeling indebted to anyone specific, that true assistance should never create emotional burden for those already struggling. These memories flooded back as Marilou sat in the podcast studio, watching Joaquin organize his notes and adjust the recording equipment. She thought about how the sports media had always focused on Manny's fierce determination, his incredible work ethic, his rise from poverty to international stardom. But they had missed the quiet revolution he had carried within his heart, his instinctive understanding that real strength meant protecting other people's dignity while lifting them up. She remembered the night their relationship had ended, not through argument or betrayal, but through mutual recognition that his boxing career demanded sacrifices neither of them had fully anticipated. Even during that difficult conversation, Manny had demonstrated the same careful consideration for her feelings that he showed everyone else. He had acknowledged her dreams, respected her need for stability, and promised that his career pursuits would never diminish the genuine care he felt for her. Years later, watching his matches on television while building her own life as a teacher in Davao City, Marilou had seen glimpses of that same gentleness in how he treated defeated opponents, in his interactions with fans, in the way he spoke about his family during interviews. The world celebrated his victories, but she alone knew the secret that made those victories meaningful. Manny Pacquiao had always been, above all else, protectively tender with every heart that trusted him. The studio's air conditioning hummed softly as Marilou gathered courage for what she knew would be the most difficult part of her revelation. Joaquin's patient demeanor reminded her of her favorite professor at Mindanao State University, where she had completed her education degree years after her relationship with Manny had ended. That professor, a kind woman named Violeta, had taught her that sometimes the most important truths required the greatest courage to speak. Marilou's mind wandered to a specific evening that had forever changed her perception of the man who would become a global icon. It was during the feast day of St. Lorenzo, their neighborhood's patron saint, when families traditionally gathered for communal celebrations. The local organizing committee, led by respected community elder Teofilo, had been struggling to raise funds for the annual festivities that brought joy to hundreds of children. She remembered watching Manny quietly observe the worried discussions among the organizers. While others offered small contributions or expressed sympathy for the financial shortfall, Manny had made a decision that revealed the true depths of his character. Without fanfare or announcement, he had approached Teofilo privately and offered to cover the entire remaining cost of the celebration. But what had moved Marilou to tears was Manny's single condition. The money must be presented as coming from multiple anonymous donors within the community. He had insisted that the celebration should feel like a collective effort, that no single family should feel excluded from the joy of contributing to their neighborhood's happiness. Manny understood that community celebrations derived their meaning from shared participation, not individual generosity. The memory that haunted her most intensely involved a rainy Tuesday evening when they had encountered Benilda, a young mother from their street, crying outside the local health clinic. Her infant son had developed a persistent fever, but the prescribed medication cost more than her family could afford. Marilu had watched Manny's face transform as he listened to Benilda's quiet desperation, seeing in his eyes the same determination that would later make him legendary in boxing rings worldwide. What happened next had defined France for Marilu, the essence of who Manny truly was. Rather than simply paying for the medication, which would have solved the immediate problem while potentially embarrassing Benilda, Manny had created an entirely different solution. He convinced the clinic's pharmacist, a family friend named Gregorio, to hire Benilda for a few days of part-time cleaning work, with wages sufficient to cover her son's treatment. This approach had accomplished something beautiful. Benilda received the money she needed while maintaining her dignity as a working mother, providing for her child. The arrangement also gave her a connection to the clinic staff, who quietly ensured she received guidance about infant care and preventive health measures. Manny had transformed a moment of crisis into an opportunity for sustainable support. Sitting in the podcast studio, Marilu realized that these memories represented more than individual acts of kindness. They revealed a pattern of emotional intelligence that had shaped every interaction she had witnessed during their time together. Manny possessed an intuitive understanding of how to help people without diminishing their sense of self-worth, how to solve problems in ways that strengthened rather than weakened the recipient's confidence. The revelation she was preparing to share with thousands of listeners wasn't about romantic love, though that had certainly existed between them. It was about something rarer and more profound: Manny's natural ability to love people in exactly the way they needed to be loved, whether they were struggling neighbors, defeated opponents, or the young woman who had briefly shared his dreams. As Joaquin checked his recording levels one final time, Marilu felt the familiar ache in her chest that always accompanied thoughts of Manny. Not the pain of lost romance, but the bittersweet recognition that she had been privileged to witness greatness in its purest form. Not in a boxing ring, but in the quiet moments when nobody else was watching. The weight of 15 years of silence pressed against Marilu's chest as she prepared to cross the invisible line between private memory and public revelation. The podcast studio felt smaller now, intimate in a way that reminded her of the tiny Sari Sari store where she and Manny used to buy cold drinks during their evening walks through General Santos City. Those simple moments had contained more genuine connection than most people experienced in entire relationships. Her decision to finally speak publicly had crystallized 3 months earlier, during a chance encounter at Robinson's Mall in Davao City. She had been shopping for school supplies for her students when she overheard a group of teenage boys discussing Manny's latest exhibition match. Their conversation had started with admiration for his boxing skills, but quickly devolved into crude speculation about his personal life, their words reflecting the tabloid rumors and social media gossip that had surrounded him for years. What disturbed Marilu most wasn't the teenagers' disrespect, but the realization that an entire generation was growing up with a distorted understanding of who Manny truly was. They saw only the public persona, the champion, the celebrity, the politician, missing entirely the extraordinary human being who had touched so many lives in ways that never made headlines. That evening, she had called her sister Esperanza, who lived in Manila and worked as a nurse at Philippine General Hospital. During their long conversation, Esperanza had shared stories of colleagues who spoke dismissively about Manny, reducing his complexity to simple stereotypes. These educated professionals, people whose opinions influenced others, had formed judgments based on incomplete information, never knowing about the profound gentleness that defined his true character. The memory that had ultimately convinced Marilu to seek out this podcast opportunity involved a quiet Sunday afternoon when she and Manny had visited his elderly neighbor, Saturnina, who had been recovering from a minor stroke. What she witnessed that day had revealed the depth of emotional intelligence that made Manny unlike anyone else she had ever known. Saturnina had been struggling with depression following her illness, feeling useless because her physical limitations prevented her from maintaining her small vegetable garden, which had been her primary source of pride and independence. While family members and other visitors offered conventional comfort or practical assistance, Manny had approached her situation from an entirely different angle. Instead of helping with the garden work himself, which would have solved the immediate problem while reinforcing Saturnina's sense of helplessness, Manny had recruited several neighborhood children, including young Amado and his sister Jovita, to learn gardening techniques from her. He had transformed Saturnina from a charity case into a respected teacher, giving her a meaningful role that utilized her knowledge and experience. Watching Saturnina's face illuminate as she instructed the eager children had shown Marilu something remarkable about Manny's approach to human relationships. He possessed an instinctive understanding that people needed purpose more than pity, dignity more than donations, connection more than charity. His solutions always seemed to strengthen rather than weaken the people he helped. These realizations had been building inside Marilu for years, creating an increasingly urgent need to correct the public misconceptions about the man she had once loved. The world deserved to know that behind the fierce competitor and public figure lived someone whose natural response to human suffering was not just to alleviate it, but to do so in ways that preserved and enhanced the dignity of everyone involved. As Joaquin made final adjustments to his equipment, Marilu felt a profound sense of responsibility settling over her. She wasn't just sharing personal memories, she was offering testimony about a kind of love that had the power to transform how people understood strength, success, and what it truly meant to be a champion in life rather than just in sports. Marilu's hands steadied as she finally began to speak into the microphone, her voice carrying the weight of truth that had been building inside her for over a decade. The podcast studio seemed to fade around her as she transported herself back to the pivotal moment that had defined her understanding of Manny's true nature. The incident that would become the foundation of everything she was about to reveal to the world. It had occurred during the third week of December 2002, just days before Christmas, when their neighborhood had been preparing for the annual Simbang Gabi celebrations. She remembered the humid evening air and the sound of children playing in the dusty streets as she and Manny walked home from his training session at the local gym. Their conversation had been interrupted by commotion coming from the small house where Remedios lived, with her 3 young children. Remedios had been one of the neighborhood's most vulnerable residents, a single mother whose husband had abandoned the family months earlier, leaving her to work multiple cleaning jobs while caring for her children. That evening, her electricity had been disconnected due to unpaid bills, and her youngest child, barely 2 years old, had been crying inconsolably in the sweltering heat and darkness. What Marilu witnessed in the following hours had forever changed her perception of what it meant to truly love someone. While other neighbors offered sympathy and small gestures of support, Manny had quietly assessed the situation with the same strategic thinking he applied to boxing matches. But instead of developing a plan to defeat an opponent, he was calculating how to restore dignity to a struggling family. Rather than simply paying Remedios' electricity bill, which would have been the obvious solution, Manny had spent the entire next day creating what he called a neighborhood employment network. He had approached local business owners, including the proprietor of a small auto repair shop named Florencio, and a woman named Minerva, who ran a successful catering service, convincing them to hire Remedios for regular part-time work that would provide steady income. But the brilliance of Manny's approach became clear only when Marilu realized how he had presented the arrangement to Remedios herself. He had told her that these business owners had been looking for reliable help, and that her reputation for hard work and honesty had made her their first choice. The job opportunities appeared to come from the business community's recognition of her value, not from anyone's pity or charity. Within 2 weeks, Remedios had steady employment that not only covered her basic expenses, but provided her with professional relationships that boosted her confidence and social standing in the neighborhood. Her children returned to school with new uniforms and supplies, but more importantly, they returned with the pride that comes from having a mother who was contributing meaningfully to her community. This memory crystallized the secret that Marilu was finally ready to share with the world. Manny Pacquiao had always been us in his deepest essence, someone who understood that real love meant protecting people's dignity while solving their problems. He possessed an extraordinary ability to see not just what people needed, but how they needed to receive help in order to maintain their self-respect and sense of agency. As she continued speaking into the microphone, Marilu felt the emotional weight of years of misunderstood silence lifting from her shoulders. The sports media had always focused on Manny's physical strength, his competitive fire, his determination to win, but they had missed the more profound truth. His greatest victories had never occurred in boxing rings, but in quiet moments when he had transformed despair into hope while preserving the humanity of everyone involved. The secret she was revealing wasn't about romantic love, though that had certainly existed between them. It was about a much rarer quality: Manny's intuitive understanding of how to love people in exactly the way their hearts needed to be loved, whether they were struggling neighbors, defeated opponents, or anyone whose path crossed his own. The confession flowed from Marilu's lips like water breaking through a dam, each word carrying the accumulated weight of years spent watching the world misunderstand the man she had once known so intimately. As she continued speaking into the microphone, she became aware of tears streaming down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from the profound relief of finally sharing a truth that had been burning inside her chest for over a decade. Her revelation about Manny's protective tenderness toward human dignity had opened a floodgate of additional memories, each one reinforcing the pattern she had recognized during their time together. She found herself recounting the story of Edgardo, a former boxer from their neighborhood who had suffered a career-ending injury and fallen into alcoholism. While others had written him off as a cautionary tale, Manny had approached Edgardo's situation with the same careful consideration he gave to everything else. Instead of lecturing about sobriety or offering money that might enable destructive habits, Manny had invited Edgardo to help train younger fighters at the local gym. The arrangement provided Edgardo with purpose and income while allowing him to share his extensive boxing knowledge with the next generation. More importantly, it positioned him as a respected mentor rather than a charity case, gradually rebuilding his self-worth and giving him reasons to maintain sobriety. Marilu's voice grew stronger as she described witnessing this transformation, watching Edgardo regain his confidence and eventually become one of the most valued trainers in General Santos City. She realized now that this pattern of dignified assistance had been Manny's approach to every relationship. From struggling neighbors to defeated opponents in the ring, the memory that moved her most deeply involved her own family during a particularly difficult period when her father, Inigo, had been diagnosed with diabetes and required expensive medication. Her family's financial situation had become strained, but her pride had prevented her from asking Manny for direct assistance. Somehow, he had sensed their struggle without her saying anything explicit. What followed had demonstrated the sophistication of Manny's emotional intelligence. Rather than offering money or paying medical bills directly, he had arranged for Inigo to provide consultation services to several local businesses, drawing on his experience as a former jeepney driver who knew every route and traffic pattern in the city. These consulting fees, which came through legitimate business arrangements that Manny had quietly facilitated, provided exactly the additional income her family needed. Years later, Inigo still spoke proudly about his brief career as a transportation consultant, never realizing that the opportunities had been created specifically to help his family while preserving his dignity. Manny had understood that her father needed to feel valuable and productive, not like a recipient of charity from his daughter's boyfriend. Sitting in the podcast studio, Marilu realized that her decision to speak publicly wasn't just about correcting misconceptions regarding Manny's character. It was about sharing a blueprint for how human beings could love each other more effectively, more respectfully, more completely. Manny's approach to relationships offered a masterclass in emotional wisdom that the world desperately needed to understand. She thought about her current students at the elementary school in Davao City, children who were growing up in a social media world where kindness was often performed for public recognition rather than practiced quietly for its own sake. These children needed to learn that true strength meant lifting others up while allowing them to maintain their pride, that real success meant creating opportunities for other people to discover their own worth. As Joaquin listened intently to her words, occasionally nodding with understanding, Marilu felt the profound satisfaction of finally fulfilling a responsibility she had carried unknowingly for years. She was serving as a witness to greatness that had been hidden in plain sight, offering testimony about a kind of love that had the power to heal not just individual relationships, but entire communities. As Marilu continued her revelation, she became acutely aware of the transformation occurring within herself. Speaking these truths aloud after years of silence felt like finally exhaling after holding her breath for an impossibly long time. The podcast studio had become a sacred space where hidden history was being converted into public record, where private wisdom was being shared with a world that desperately needed to understand what authentic love looked like in practice. Her thoughts turned to the broader implications of what she was revealing. In a society increasingly dominated by performative kindness and publicized charity, Manny's approach to helping others represented something revolutionary: genuine care that sought no recognition, assistance that strengthened rather than diminished the recipient, love that operated through empowerment rather than dependency. She remembered the last conversation she had with Manny before their relationship ended, a quiet evening walk through their neighborhood when he had shared his dreams of someday being able to help not just individuals, but entire communities. Even then, his vision had been remarkably sophisticated. He hadn't spoken about building monuments to his generosity or establishing foundations that would bear his name. Instead, he had described creating systems that would allow people to help themselves while maintaining their dignity and agency. The memory that crystallized this philosophy involved a conversation with elderly neighbor Panfilo, a former teacher who had struggled with poverty in his retirement years. Rather than simply providing financial assistance, Manny had asked Panfilo to help him improve his reading and writing skills, offering payment for tutoring sessions that served multiple purposes. Panfilo received income while feeling valued for his expertise. Manny genuinely improved his education, and their entire neighborhood witnessed the respect being shown to elderly wisdom. Marilou's voice grew more confident as she explained how these experiences had shaped her own approach to teaching and community service. Working with children in Davao City, she had implemented strategies inspired by Manny's example, always seeking ways to build students' confidence while addressing their needs. When student Crispin struggled with mathematics, she had asked him to help organize the classroom library, discovering his exceptional organizational skills while building his self-esteem. When young Avelina faced family financial pressures, Marilou had created opportunities for her to earn small amounts by tutoring younger students, providing income while reinforcing her academic strengths. The ripple effects of Manny's approach to relationships had extended far beyond their brief romantic connection, influencing how she understood love, service, and human dignity for the rest of her life. She realized now that her decision to become a teacher had been partially inspired by witnessing how he had treated every person as someone with inherent value and untapped potential. As she spoke into the microphone, Marilou felt the presence of thousands of future listeners who would hear these words, people who might be inspired to adopt similar approaches in their own relationships and communities. She imagined parents learning to help their children while preserving their independence, employers discovering ways to support struggling workers while maintaining their professional dignity, neighbors finding methods to assist each other that built rather than eroded self-respect. The weight of this responsibility felt both overwhelming and profoundly meaningful. She wasn't just sharing personal memories, she was offering a testament to the transformative power of love that operated through wisdom rather than impulse, through understanding rather than assumption, through empowerment rather than dependency. Her revelation about Manny's true nature represented more than biographical correction. It offered a blueprint for human relationships that could revolutionize how people understood strength, success, and service. In a world increasingly divided by misunderstanding and superficial judgments, the truth about Manny Pacquiao's character provided hope that authentic love still existed and still had the power to heal broken communities, one dignified interaction at a time. As Marilou's voice finally fell silent in the podcast studio, she felt a profound sense of completion that had eluded her for 15 years. The red recording light continued to glow, but the weight that had pressed against her chest since that day in Robinson's Mall had completely lifted. She had finally fulfilled the responsibility she hadn't even realized she was carrying, serving as a witness to the kind of love that could transform the world if only people understood its true nature. Joaquin's respectful silence filled the studio as he allowed the gravity of her revelation to settle. Outside, Manila continued its relentless pace, millions of people navigating their daily struggles while remaining unaware that within this small recording space, something significant had just occurred. The truth about Manny Pacquiao's character was now preserved in digital form, ready to reach listeners who might desperately need to understand that authentic love still existed in their complicated world. Marilou's thoughts turned to her current students in Davao City, children who would grow up in a world where this podcast might influence how they understood strength, kindness, and human dignity. She imagined young people learning that true power meant lifting others up while preserving their pride, that real success meant creating opportunities for other people to discover their own worth, that genuine love meant seeing and nurturing the inherent value in every person they encountered. The memory that brought her the most comfort involved a letter she had received 2 years earlier from Consolacion, an elderly woman from General Santos City whose family had benefited from one of Manny's quiet interventions during the early 2000s. Consolacion had somehow tracked down Marilou's address and written to thank her for the kindness that Manny had shown during her husband's final illness. The letter revealed that Consolacion had never known who had arranged for her husband to receive experimental treatment at a Manila hospital, never realized that the scholarship fund covering their expenses had been created specifically for their situation. Reading that letter had convinced Marilou that Manny's approach to love had created lasting legacies, far beyond what either of them had realized at the time. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of families had been touched by his quiet interventions, their lives improved in ways that preserved their dignity while solving their problems. Each act of hidden generosity had rippled outward, influencing how recipients treated others, creating a network of enhanced compassion that continued expanding years later. As she sat in the podcast studio, Marilou realized that her own life had been shaped by witnessing this blueprint for authentic love. Her career as a teacher, her approach to community service, her understanding of how to help people while preserving their self-respect, all of these had been influenced by the months she had spent observing Manny's extraordinary emotional intelligence in action. The revelation she had shared would now become part of Manny's public legacy, balancing the focus on his athletic achievements with recognition of his deeper contributions to human dignity. Future generations would understand that his greatest victories had occurred not in boxing rings, but in quiet moments when he had transformed despair into hope while preserving the humanity of everyone involved. Her final thought before leaving the studio centered on gratitude, not just for the privilege of having loved and been loved by someone so remarkable, but for the opportunity to finally share a truth that could inspire others to love more wisely, more completely, more authentically. Manny Pacquiao had always been, in his deepest essence, someone who understood that real strength meant protecting people's hearts while solving their problems. As Marilou gathered her belongings and prepared to return to her normal life, she carried with her the satisfaction of knowing that the world now possessed a more complete understanding of what it meant to be truly great. The secret was finally revealed, and its impact would continue long after her voice had faded from the recording. Thank you for watching another episode of Champion Stories. If you enjoyed today's story, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of our upcoming inspiring tales about Manny Pacquiao. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one, and many times your ideas inspire our next episode. See you next time.